Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. And wow, the last couple of days have been really bad for Russia. We have plenty of bad news for Russia to discuss, so let's just get into it. News number one, the Kursk offensive that Russia really tries to present like their big victory, like they are completely liberating Kursk while also advancing in the east, yada yada. Well, it turns out that after already over 11 days of their supposedly massive offensive, it's a little bit of like a Groundhog Day, because they're claiming that they're assaulting a settlement to then only find out that that settlement is going to be again assaulted a couple of days later. So like they're stating we're assaulting the settlement, we're liberated it, then they are assaulting the same settlement once again. There's been plenty of videos coming from the Ukrainian armed forces. You can find them on our Discord channel in the Not Safe for Work channel, obviously because it's a military activity. But there's been a lot of videos, especially around Lyubimovka area. Remember, see here, like even on this map, on Deep State map, which is the group that is making this map, you can see their logo here at the top corner. But the Lyubimovka was actually supposedly liberated, one of the first ones during the Russian assaults on the 10th. And now we suddenly find out that not only Russia have not been liberating Lyubimovka, that there's still intense fighting for that settlement. And the same goes for all of the other settlements that Russia claims to have liberated. Moreover, we've heard recently that Russians are actually losing some of the ground in Kursk as well. On this northern area right over here, Russians actually lost a little bit of a ground to Ukrainian armed forces. But again, I wouldn't expect for Ukrainian armed forces to invest significantly into taking more Russian territory. I think Ukrainians are finding it very comfortable fighting against Russia on the territory of Russia and essentially destroying and mining the territory of Russia rather than the territory of Ukraine. So Kursk operation, big success. We're going to do a full map update later this week, and we're going to talk about the front line and what's happening, how Russia is advancing and so on. But as always, I want to underscore that Ukrainians are in the defensive operation. They are maybe trading some of the Ukrainian territory, but they're trading that territory for time. For now, let's hear a couple of words from the person that is actually participating in combat in Kursk. So this is quite a famous in the Ukrainian and Russian speaking communities. The person on your screen that you see, his call sign is the Eastern, I guess I can translate it here. So he's quite famous. He's from the Donbass and he's fighting against the Russian occupiers. And he is fighting in Kursk area. So there is a lengthy interview. I'm gonna leave in the comment section link to this interview. You just will need to translate the page to English to read it, but I want to focus on the last couple of things that were said about him. And he is stating what's happening in the front line, because we kind of see that the situation is really bad for Ukraine, so it's important for us also to get that perspective from the frontline fighters. And what he's stating is the situation has been more or less static in recent days. It's not like the Adel settlement is either Ukrainian or Russian every other day. The Russians are now struck in Lyubimovka, which we just talked about, and he's talking about Kursk. They cannot break through any further. Although the Russian group is larger than our group, we should not be surprised if we lose some settlements and then recapture in a week. So he's stating there is a lot of fighting against Russians in Kursk area, despite the fact that Russians have the advantage. They are still holding their positions tight. And the journalists are asking, you have been at the front line for more than 2 years. Before that, you carried out combat missions as a spotter. Assess your psycho-emotional state after so many years of combat. Well, he states he's not an infantryman, that is true. I do not have time to get as tired as the infantry. I do not feel moral or physical fatigue now. On the contrary, the new phase of war, our entry into Russian territory, inspire me. We were on the defensive for a long time, and when we finally captured the territory ourselves, it gave me a boost of faith in our strengths, and now I feel great. There we go. So Ukrainians are having a hard time. It's definitely coming in for the people at the front line, probably about a lot more for the infantry. But generally speaking, the fact that Ukrainians are kicking back against the Russian occupiers is definitely inspired the Ukrainian troops, and it's being said by the Ukrainian troops themselves. Another big loss for Russia. And I was so happy that I was proven wrong. I recently had a stream, and when I was doing this stream, we had preliminary data on what the voting percentage was. It was about 80% of the vote counted, and the gap seemed pretty big. It was over 11% gap between the yes vote and a no vote in this Moldovan elections. So Moldova is a state in Europe that Russia definitely wants to keep it in its sphere of influence. And Moldova decided that they would like to join the European Union in the last couple of years. They have already been invited to be a candidate state in the European Union. So now Moldovans needed to show their desire to do so, to untie the hands of the politicians that would like to proceed with the future EU integrations. And it seemed at first that there was over 11% gap between the no vote and the yes vote, but because the first votes to be counted were from rural areas, most notably Maya Sandu, the president of Moldova, claims that there's been a lot of Russian interference, and we know that a lot of these people in the rural areas, they are a little bit more susceptible to what was happening in Ukraine and didn't want Moldova essentially to look like this. However, when it got down to the city, specifically to the capital city, and counting the votes of expats, then the percentages in support for EU skyrocketed. My expectations were shattered because I was expecting maybe the capital city to be a little bit more pro-EU, but I was not sure about the population and how they're feeling about this. I was totally wrong. I have no problem admitting it, and this is the best thing to be wrong about. So with a very narrow margin, I believe it's 50.46%, so just half a percent point, Moldovans have said yes to change the constitution and engrave in the Moldovan constitution that they are on their way to join the European Union, which basically unties the hands for any kind of a pro-European party to start implementing the necessary reforms to join the European Union. It's a great step forward, and it's an opportunity for Moldovan people to finally escape that never-ending cycle of poverty and corruption that they have been stuck with. I talk about this more in the live stream that I did just recently, so please watch that if you're interested. Another bad news came in for Russia from the Russian soldiers themselves. Now, we know that Russia is using their soldiers as cannon fodder. They're just sending them forward. Like the logic for the Russian is very simple. Let's send the team of 10 guys to attack that position over there. Maybe 9 of these guys will die, but at least one of them is going to be entrenched there. And while he's fighting, we're going to send another 10 guys to go and help him out. Then maybe they will kill only 8 guys. Then this guy that came into position will receive 2 more people. And then we're going to send 10 more guys. And then maybe only 5 will be killed, and so on and so on. So essentially, they are trying to reinforce their further positions by this human wave tactic. And with that human wave tactic, Russian fighters are clearly seeing their comrades dying. The problem is that the Russian population is very docile, so these orcs, they just go like lamb to a slaughter. There's been plenty of cases like this where there was some kind of a drunk command to send the Russian forces towards attacking Ukrainian positions, and then they would record video. It was like, oh my god, it was such a bad command, we are gonna die, so sayonara, we're going to our deaths. And then they died. Wow, what a surprise. And the main question was like, well, why don't they just raise their arms against the drunk command and shoot their officers? Well, these guys, they finally did something like this. These guys said that, well, we've been sent to attack the Ukrainian position. It's a certain death. So instead, we're entrenching our positions against all forces against Ukrainian. They're not calling Ukrainian good guys. These are still orcs. But it's a first sign and a first ever case where Russians are essentially mutinying against, I hope it's a word, are conducting mutiny against the Russian command. So instead of just obeying their orders or just laying down their weapons and surrendering to the mercy of the Russian state, they are instead fighting for their lives. Now, it's only few of them, and they are clearly going to be dead very, very soon. But the point still stands. And some people wrote, but what about the Prigozhin situation, the Prigozhin's mutiny? The problem with Prigozhin's mutiny that it wasn't really like an organic grassroots mutiny. It was more of an elites dispute because Prigozhin really tried to participate in this elites game. He had his private military company, private army. Yes, there was a lot of sentiment inside of the Russian army at that point that Prigozhin used, but it was still not a grassroots movement. It was an organized event, and it was just following another figure of authority. In this case, this is already grassroots, and my hope is while this is the first one, it's not going to be the last one. More bad news for Russia. We're not going to end here. So Mark Rutte, the new NATO Secretary General, has actually called South Korea and had talks about the potential responses that South Korea will do in regards to the news and intelligence provided that North Korean troops are indeed being sent to fight and assault Ukraine. Now, this is great. My only worry is that the South Koreans will be pigeonholed into working in the same BS attitude as a lot of the other countries in NATO, instead of providing more help. I really hope that this is not going to be the case, because if South Korea will actually start supplying Ukraine with weapons without major restrictions, without any kind of weird activities and following bullshit plan about let's tire out Putin with making sure that we sacrifice enough of Ukrainian lives to him so he gets tired of this campaign and then backs off. I really hope that instead South Koreans will look at their security and will understand that if Russia wins with the help of North Koreans right now, then the next time it's going to be the South Koreans that are going to be facing North Koreans with the Russians together, and it's going to be their problem to handle. So right now it's better to support Ukraine. Let's hope for that. Again, really great news for Ukraine, not so good news for Russia. Now, Zelensky was on his trip to present his victory plan. The plan itself, as I said, we should not expect any major announcements until the election inside of US have concluded. I really hope it will, and I will not hammer you down. I'm pretty sure, like, if you're from US, you've already heard all of the advertisements and all of the cases for the party members and so on, but just know that we are obviously supporting Kamala Harris here on this channel because she is in support for Ukraine. And support for Ukraine is what matters. When we're talking about the Zelensky's victory plan, the most critical part of the plan, and I'm pretty sure you understand it, I understand it, is that there is a supply of equipment and weapons to Ukraine. And this is indeed happening. So besides the last week announced over 400 million aid package that was announced by Joe Biden, now Lloyd Austin has actually visited Kyiv and provided a package of additional 400 million that includes the M113s, missiles, air defense, everything that Ukraine really needs to fight Russians. But the better part, like the cherry on top, is that that's not only one. We talked extensively about the fact that there should be big support for the Ukrainian production of ammunition and weapons, because Ukrainians know exactly what to produce, how to produce, and they can produce it cheaper. So the reports are that USA will allocate $800 million to purchase drones that are made in Ukraine. That is a huge investment into Ukrainian drone program. 800 millions is a lot of drones. That can be really big problem for Russia, and my hopes is that it will. Now, thank you so much for United States for this support. More needs to come. This should be increasing tempo of support for Ukraine. Then the victory plan will stop being such a nebulous concept, and as Ukraine is going to slowly start changing the narrative on the front line, we're going to see something else. And this is a good point to kind of talk about whether or not Ukraine can change the narrative on the front line. Because while the situation is pretty dire, right? We open the map, we look day to day, we follow the Ukrainian situation on the front line. We say, well, you know, there's the situation in Torezk, there is the situation around Kurakhivka where Russians are advancing, there has been lost the Vuhledar, yada yada. So a lot of these things that are ongoing on the front line, and people are like, yeah, it's like this looks pretty bad. But my point is that for Ukraine to fight, it's always the war of resources. For Ukraine to successfully wage their defensive operation, they need to sacrifice and essentially pay to kill Russians a certain amount of resources. And those resources might be either the ammunition and weapons, which Ukraine has a shortage of. It can be either people of Ukraine with regard to stating something like no step backwards, and then we get something like Bakhmut that was a huge problem for Ukraine, or sacrifice some of that territory. So I think that territory is the least of these problems, and I'm going to explain why. The best option obviously would be to sacrifice ammunition, and that would be true. The unfortunate thing is what actually General Zaluzhny said around the 2022-2023. Because what General Zaluzhny said is that he wants to say sorry to all of the forces that are defending Ukrainian front lines. But the newly arrived help and newly arrived ammunitions and tanks and armor vehicles and everything need to go into the new assault brigades that will then be able to attack and recapture Russian-controlled territory. And the same goes for what's happening right now. While Ukraine is defending territory and it does fall back, it definitely seems that a lot of help that is coming to Ukraine is not being fielded once again. It is not a secret anymore. It's been said by many Russian propagandists that Ukrainians are accumulating weapons, ammunition, vehicles, and everything. Just to give you an example, we haven't seen the Leopard 1 tanks at all, almost at all. We've seen maybe some of them in training, but not on the front lines. The Leopard 1 tanks, they have been delivered in large quantities. We're talking hundreds of them. So there has been a lot of ammunition that Ukraine has been stockpiling, a lot of vehicles and so on. So there is a very clear definition that Ukraine is preparing for something. They're looking for an opportunity. I don't want to raise the hopes up because let's just give it time and see where it's going to end up. But I want you all to remember that what is happening right now is Ukrainian defensive operation. And as we all saw, listening to the Ukrainian armed forces perspective, it's like, yes, we can lose ground and so on, but if then we strike back against the Russians and actually make some wins, then it raises the morale, then it cheers everyone up, and it shows that indeed they can fight and they can win. So I'm hoping for more of these counter punches like Kursk operation going forward with some of the prepared units. Additional question that sometimes appeared to me is like, how are the prisoners doing in the Ukrainian armed forces that they recruited? A lot of them are fighting in the 93rd Holodny Yar Brigade. The brigade is very famous, it's well known, and the reviews about their performance is impressive. They say they are super motivated and fighting really well. I just know that some people ask for this. So here is some information about this. And a couple of really bad news again for Russia. Some of their problems with their grassroots support donations, where the volunteers are making these masking nets, now suddenly start appearing all across Russia as being used to cover the buildings during the restoration process. So the same masking nets that would be, I'm going to try to zoom in so you maybe see this. Yes, so the same masking nets that would be used to hide the Russian positions in Ukraine instead are being used on the territory of Russia and being sold for cheap. And that's great to know, to see that Russians don't really care about the Russian military and more care about making sure that when they're repairing their building, it's camouflaged well. Additional bad news for Russians. We're not gonna stop this time. It's all bad news for Russians. This time it's bad news for Russians that are fighting in Kursk. So we talked about Russians not really being able to achieve a lot in Kursk despite their assault, and they are losing a lot of men there. The problem for the people that are dying in Kursk right now is that the men that they lost there do not count as people lost in the special military operation. So they are counted like people lost on the territory of Russia. So for you that don't know, if a person dies in on the territory of Ukraine, then Russia pays a huge sum of money to their relatives as to commemorate his sacrifice and his death. That is not happening when they are dying on Kursk area. So the relatives of these soldiers of Russians that are dying on the territory of Kursk, they get nothing. Absolutely zero. And it's truly hilarious that Russians, that a lot of them joined to fight and kill Ukrainians just to get some of that blood money, they're not getting anything from Putin. That's how you play stupid game and win stupid prizes. Finally, let's talk about the most important thing. So this is our slow-moving campaign for the Ukrainian armed forces. We're trying to get more and more help for Ukrainian armed forces, getting them trucks, the drones, everything. Now, I know that a lot of my supporters have been donating to Kamala Harris's campaign. That's why, as I say, we're going to try to move it slowly as you have some disposable income. Please consider supporting the Ukrainian armed forces. This is what I want this channel to do. This is what I want this community to do. This is why I love you. Slava Ukraini, trust in Ukrainian armed forces, and I see you next time.